Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to each of our nominees for being here and for your willingness to serve. Dr. Goodfriend, as you know, the Fed has a dual mandate to maximize employment while keeping inflation in check. And if you're confirmed as a Fed governor, then one of your main responsibilities will be to set interest rates that satisfy that dual mandate, which means you're going to need to make accurate projections about inflation. So I think it's time to take a look at your track record on how you've done at making inflation projections in the past. In July 2011, you told the Wall Street Journal that the Fed should not be reluctant to, quote, move interest rates up preemptively against inflation at this stage in the business cycle. You also said, quote, the Fed needs to restore positive real short-term interest rates fairly soon. That was 2011. Otherwise, higher trend inflation and inflation scares will force the Fed in the future to more than reverse any short-run gains in employment that it might otherwise achieve in the present. Now, we're almost 7 years past that statement. Meanwhile, real short-term interest rates are still negative, and inflation is undershooting the Fed's 2% target. So do you agree that you got that projection wrong?
Absolutely.
Okay, that's good. Let's take a look at another one. Senator Menendez raised this, but I think it's worth repeating. In May 2012, you said, quote, even if the Fed did succeed in the Herculean task of getting the unemployment rate down to 7%, we could never be sure that unemployment rate was below what we call the natural rate, in which case it would give rise to a rising inflation rate in the next few years, which would be disastrous for the economy. Now, as you know, the Fed did succeed in getting the unemployment rate below 7%, and in the 5+ years since you made that statement, the unemployment rate has steadily fallen, and now it's about 4%. Meanwhile, inflation remains below the Fed's 2% target. So I didn't hear a clear answer in response to Senator Menendez, so let me just ask it directly. You got that one wrong too, right?
Let me remember the context. The context was, I think, for this comment, that I was saying if you look at only the unemployment rate and not the inflation rate, you could make a mistake. But as long as the inflation rate was low, I would be in favor of maintaining monetary stimulus.
Well, but you actually said just the opposite in the past, and you talked about preemptively raising interest rates. You know, I'm concerned about this because these wrong predictions are not outliers for you. They have been part of your overall approach to monetary policy, which effectively ignores the Fed's full employment mandate and instead focuses solely on speculative concerns about inflation. This matters because focusing only on inflation does enormous harm to the economy and to working families. You know, you were talking about raising interest rates back in 2011 when the unemployment rate was 9%. A year later, you worried about the Fed letting unemployment drop below 7%. You know, the difference between that 9% unemployment rate or that 7% unemployment rate, the 4% unemployment rate we've got now is millions and millions of jobs, millions of families that have those jobs and are out there working and able to support themselves and their families. I think based on the kind of judgment that you have demonstrated, American families are very lucky that you weren't on the Fed board over the past several years, and I think it would be a mistake to put you on the Fed board now. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.